Today we'll be in conversation with Ashley PEñA, who's joined us from New York, and Sana Ginwalla, who will be moderating the conversation. We're very happy to have them both with us today.
Cool, thank you so much. Hi everybody, I'm Sana Ginwalla. I'm speaking from Lusaka, Zambia. This is where I was born and raised. I'm a curator and archivist, and today I'm really excited to moderate this conversation for Vibrate with Ashley. What we're going to do is basically give the floor to Ashley shortly to share a bit more about her work, to really get an understanding of what it's about and her processes. And then I'll moderate a few questions at the end, which will also open up for you all to ask as well. My background is in photography, curatorship, and archives, so I'm really excited to hear more about Ashley's work, especially her use of film as well in her practice. So yeah, we will have some time at the end of the session to get questions from you all. You can put them in the chat or put your hand up and we can address that. But yeah, perhaps Ashley, you can go ahead and get started. I'm really excited for this.
Thank you, Sana, for the introduction. Um, for those who don't know me, my name is Ashley, and I am an image maker working between Dominican Republic and New York. And I'm really excited to, talk a little bit about my practice and, my process and inspirations. I'm going to be breaking it down into 5 sections. So the first section, I'll be speaking about, my process from idea to image. The second thing I'll be talking about are, the difference between being intuitive and being intentional within the image making process. The third thing I'll be talking about are, questions to ask yourself before hitting, that shutter button. The fourth is the dangers of the aesthetic, the powers of image making, and making your work visible. And lastly, I will be speaking about imaging as resistance and my personal inspirations. So I'll be starting here with from idea to image. First things first, when it comes to image making, I like to start with feeling or question or, some type of tension that I'm dealing with. Image making, not only begins with an idea, but, it's some sort of emotion or memory or some type of lingering question. Some of the questions that I ask myself are, what does absence look like? Right now I'm working with archives um, and that is one of the questions that I'm asking, within that. How does joy survive in harsh conditions? And what does resistance feel like in the body? It all starts with curiosity. Second thing, research and reflection. Emphasis on this right here because I think it's important to know, you know, the themes that you're working with, but also, the words that you associate with your, imaging. It's important, to read and write. And, I like to do a lot of journaling. So a lot of my ideas come from, journaling, just as, images can have 1,000 words, with the words themselves, you can create the images from that. And the sense of gathering is important, not just of the facts, but the textures, the colors, the histories, and the atmospheres that surround the ideas that you're working with and, the text that you're engaging with. The third thing, when you're visualizing the concept, I think, there's multiple ways that you can do this, by sketching, and thinking about how you're going to use, lights and shadow and color and gesture and composition to express a sort of emotion or concept. And, also thinking about location and setting and how, that aids to carrying, a certain particular story. You have to ask yourself the question of, who is embodying it. And, this kind of like a number of ways by sketching, mood boarding, writing, scribbling on a piece of paper, writing in your notes. It's important to remember, the things that you're curious about throughout. Um, and the fourth thing, connecting with your subjects or collaborators. actually subjects and collaborators, because the people you're photographing should be your collaborators. They shouldn't just be subjects of your gaze. And when you're working with people in image making, that requires a level of trust. It should be a collaborative process, especially when you're working within your own community. You're not just taking a photo, but you're creating one, with the person in front of your camera. I like to think of them as participants rather than subjects, but it can easily turn the other way around when there's a lack of trust within that process. And this, creates a more vulnerable and truthful image at the end. Just as an image can be truthful, you can lie in an image as well. And then continuing with the process, technicality. I don't really like to put too much emphasis on, technical skills, things like that, because, the majority of my practice have been, I haven't had too much resources. I literally got my first digital camera this year. Like, I officially bought my first camera this year. But what I was working in the past, I was, using what was around me. I was using my sister's camera. It was like a startup Canon Rebel camera, but that's what I had. And a little point and shoot. I think that allows me to have, certain access in particular areas where, I can't really bring a huge camera with me. So I think it's important to work with what you have. I still don't even own lights. I use found light. Within my personal work, I'm always using like either the sun or some lamps in the area, some hallway lights, some street lights, that can be just as beautiful as, a pro photo light. It's just working with what you have. If you have the tools to edit, you can put more emphasis in editing. If you don't have the tools to create an image at its highest quality. But these technical elements, they all go into making an emotion or serving purpose. Okay. The sixth thing is making the image. This isn't just an act of creating, but being intentional as well. The way things can happen unexpectedly in the moment. You can't plan every aspect of a photo. The way someone turns your head, the way they sneezes, the way light shifts. There's a million ways you can capture, a person. And yes, that. The seventh thing, reflection and editing. I think after shooting or creating a work, you have to sit with the work as well. I think that's, one of the most important aspects of, image making is the editing part. That's not something you could just do. I don't think that's something that happens really quick. I personally sit with my images for long periods of time, maybe too long. I think it's important to also share when you honestly feel like it's ready. But image selection, that's such a intricate part, of image making, what holds the most emotional or political weight, not selecting too many images from a particular shoot. Sometimes an image can be more weightful when you're more selective with it, my personal opinion. But yes, editing will shape a narrative. Well, my voice is cracking. When I'm shooting, I tend to shoot a little bit more wide, and in my editing, I do a lot of cropping and framing. But within that, you have to be aware of the power of framing and cropping, and the things that you're taking away from the image, as well as what you're centering within an image. And then lastly, the way you share the image and the context that it lives in. You don't want your images to live and die, on social media, for example. I feel like it's important to share them in different ways. It's important to, I feel like, make the work tangible. Whether it be in a gallery or in a book, or even just the little small print that you put in a photo album, creating your own family album. I think that's important. And then, what kind of text or titles that accompanies, the images. One word, one sentence that goes along with a picture can take someone's perception, one way and focus it, towards a different direction. Words associated with images, you have to be very careful in the way that you frame both of them. And then here, I'm thinking about being candid and being intentional. For me personally, I like to call what I do stage documentaries, because I feel like, I will take pictures of the people that I'm around, the people that are in my life, and a lot of the times it happens candidly, but I will direct them in some sort of way, whether that be in posing or the gaze. Like I don't know, sometimes people will look away from the camera, but I tell them, like, hey, like, you looking at the camera, your gaze is very important. I feel like when other people look at the image, you want to, be looking back at them, and then that is a whole conversation with that. But in fleeting moments, when I am making an image, in a moment that is fleeting, I make sure that there is some sort of interaction between me and the person that is in front of my lens, whether that happens before or after the image is taken. I try to make that happen before most of the times, but, sometimes it doesn't always work that way. So I try to get that interaction after. And then here are some questions that I think everyone should ask themselves before, clicking the shutter button. First question is the person in front of your lens a subject of your gaze or an active participant in it? Like I was saying, are they a collaborator within your image? Are they, contributing to it in some sort of way, whether that be in conversation, with the things that you're thinking about, or whether they add towards the imaging and the editing aspect. Yeah, there's different ways that you can make it collaborative. Second question, what does your framing or cropping authorize or erase? Yeah, like I was saying, framing and cropping I think, is a very delicate thing when it comes to image making. So, that can easily become destructive or an act of empowerment. And third question, are you the best person who can tell the story? I think a lot of people need to ask themselves this question.
I mean, I think for me, what's been interesting hearing Ashley talk about is for her composition taking place in post-production, rather than when she's shooting, which is a little bit different from how I work as well. But I really like that Ashley's work, which I'm sure she'll share later in her presentation, is a commercial nature, but also a personal body of work that looks at her relationship as a diasporic Black African American living in the US. And I think a lot of the communities and people she's documenting are people that she's built a personal relationship with, which is something that it's evident that but it's really important because there's an ethics around that. And so I think when you're dealing with portraiture with people, that's something that I think, as she said, we really need to think about and consider the person sitting for your photograph not as the subject, but as a collaborator, as someone who's co-creating this image with you, and is participating in this creative process as much as you are. And then that, I mean, that kind of then makes me think about this approach of work being more like a co-authorship of the way one is being documented and being remembered. So yeah, there's just so many wonderful nuggets of wisdom that I think
Yeah,
Ashley is sharing so far.
100%.
Um, yeah, and also like the idea of like the work must not die, because I think also like the age of social media and also just being able to so easily share our work online is great, but also what's the longevity and sustainability of that? Um, you know, I run a gallery in Lusaka as well, but even that showing work in a gallery, like how sustainable is it? Does that really allow it to live? So I think her mention about books and publication and writing is also so important. And I think all photographers must befriend writers or become writers because it's in the text, in writing, in publishing, whether digitally or physically in a tangible thing, that I think a work and a body of work can really have space to become an archival object,
Yeah.
become a reference point in the future. Um, so
So
yeah, I was curious to know what she prefers as well in terms of uh, where her work goes after she shot it.
yeah.
Yeah.
And with you doing more archival work, do you also, has writing been part of your practice for a long time? Is this something that done recently? Like, when did that relationship start?
I think very similar to Ashley was really looking at my own family archives as well and starting off with what is available to me immediately, whether that's materials like archives, but also like technical materials. So for me, it started with just being able to have access to family archives and actually see the world through its lens. Um, but also recently a new way in which um, I think I've thought about documenting the past or making reference to it is film, like moving image and telling stories through this mode. Because it's really encompasses all the things that Ashley was talking about in terms of reference points, right? So like, what are you reading? What spaces are you going through? What are you writing about? What music are you listening to? And I think moving image and film really encompasses all of these references really nicely. Um, but yeah, so I'm working on like a period film based in 1970s Zambia, and the
Oh,
archive is
wow.
a huge reference for this. And the archive meaning, newspapers, social history archives, elderly people, like intergenerational conversations, and how does the film then encompass all of these like research methodologies that we're employing? Um, so yeah, I'm always interested in what happens after the image, but I think what this conversation is making me think about is what is taking place before the image is even being
Yeah.
made in the end. If you're calling yourself an image maker, Ashley's like work is such a great example of that because there's so much thought going on before the shutter is being clicked.
Yeah.
Um,
It's
yeah.
incredibly intentional and well thought out. And it's nice as well because, like we were saying earlier, with social media, it can be very fleeting the way you see someone's work. And it's nice to just know the process behind it and how they approached it. We all approach things differently. So it's quite inspiring. Looking
Yeah.
forward to seeing this film you're working on there.
Yeah, it's in production. I'm producing it. I'm research consulting and producing it. It should be out 2027, but we're in the process of filming. And if anybody's in London, by the way, there's a screening happening tomorrow at
Oh,
Afro Society. So any London people, there's like a short like pre-screening that's happening in relation to the film. So you can catch it. I
wow.
can put a cheeky link in the in the chat if you want to
Please do.
check.
Please share the link. I wish I knew because I was thinking of going to London tomorrow and decided not to. So it's just
Oh,
really fun.
sweet.
But yeah, so just to respond to your question in the chat, yes, okay. David's already replied, so we're good, we're fine. Just to update anyone who's just joined, we're in conversation with Ashley PEñA and it's being moderated by Sana Ginwalla. Ashley's having a little bit of technical difficulties with internet, but she'll be back with us very shortly. So we're just reflecting on what we've learned so far and what's been shared. Yeah, it's moving on.
Yeah, and I think perhaps maybe I'm curious to know how many how many people are resonating a lot with this, because for me, every point I'm like writing notes. But yeah, if a lot of this process is similar to anyone attending, especially the editorial process, which was going to be one of the things I wanted to talk about in terms of less is more. Um, yeah, I mean, I feel like some people might have a maximalist approach to creating a body of work, but I really liked what Ashley was saying in terms of the intention and the platform, like where is the work going to end up? Is it going to be in a book? Is it in a gallery? Is it a magazine feature? Um, I'm curious to know about like editorial processes for people because I find that to be the most difficult part. And I usually need consulting, like I need somebody else to chime in and tell me that it makes sense. It's kind of like looking at your own essay like over and over and thinking it's trash.
Yeah.
But actually, like when somebody else reads it, they're like, oh, okay, but I think it needs this structure. Or also like a sequencing. I think a lot of editorial work also needs a certain type of sequencing, which then defines how it's read, which from somebody, as somebody who also comes from a literary background, allows me to sort of bring that literary understanding into photographic work or image-based work.
Like weave it together. That's very interesting, actually. I've never thought about that. Because
Yeah.
obviously the format you present your work is really important, and I've never thought about the editorial structure specifically for books. But if everyone that's listening right now, if you could share in the chat, I don't know, the desired format you'd like to see your work in when you're creating it. It might change per project, but you're like most excited. I don't know, if your dream is to create a photo book or if you want to be in certain galleries, it'd be interesting to see where everyone's coming from. And if you're not an image maker, what you're most interested in observing.
I think for me, I find editing really difficult, and just hearing your process is really interesting. Also, the comment you made about sometimes less is more in a way, and thinking about the kind of final resting place or the final place where the work is going to end up. And I was asking people like what their processes look like, because for me, I look at it from a literary kind of background, like when you have a structure and a narrative, the sequencing of the photographs also matter. So Brandon here on the group has shared that sitting with your images for a while has been very helpful for my practice. I ebb and flow with thinking about what kind of picture I want to make and intuitively letting my eye and voice make the decisive picture moment. Um, Jeremy, I think, has shared places where the photographs can end up in terms of editorial work, so art galleries, books, magazines, and ads. Um, some people are guided in the editorial process by who their audience is, who are they making the work for, and how do they reach them. And Oriomi has mentioned that they're finding themselves thinking a lot about what they can add to the frame in the gallery space, along with the image to further tell the story, which I love because I'm like, what happens after the image, right? Like what's happening after the image? So, um, and then somebody else has shared, oh, there's so many things. I love it. Okay. A descriptive approach rather than prescriptive, letting the subject be and capture it. That's where the participation lays. So we were talking as well about like not looking at the subject as a subject, but as a participator and collaborator, as you mentioned. Um, and in street photography and landscape. Um, and then, yeah, also not being very hard on yourself. So I think Caleb has mentioned about being one's own worst critic, but also just allowing the viewer to deduct what is seen. Um, Looking to get inspired to make more work and finding a space. So keeping images to yourself. So I think as we lead back into your presentation, I think you ended just where you were talking about are we the best people to tell the story? And also you were mentioning about the editorial process. Um, for you, Ashley, when you're editing, is there like a consultation team or like people that you sort of definitely want to speak to before it goes out in the world, or is it something that you need to sort of make and exercise agency in deciding on your own? Yeah, I'm curious to know about that as you continue on your questions about before hitting the shutter button.
Yeah, so in terms of where the work will be seen after, um, I mean, I sit a lot. I sit with a long time with my images. Yeah, like I said, I feel like I sit with it a little too long, and then when that happens, I'm just like, I, I think it creates a sort of distance. I feel like it's important to share at least, the image that you're creating with the people that you're, around, whether that be friends or family, because keeping the images to yourself, I mean, I feel like it's a little bit selfish in a way. Um, I mean, I feel like if the image is done, let's say the image is done and finished, and you know what the themes that you're working with um is I don't know, when it comes to thinking about where you want it to live, I think it's important to think about yeah, the spaces that it occupies and then the people that occupy those spaces. I mean, there are certain, institutions and museums that have been very, I feel like, um, exclusive and very, I mean, you have to have morals. I mean, some places won't align with what you're um speaking of. I mean, it depends on what you're working with, the themes that you're working with, but in terms of being inclusive, I mean, a lot of spaces are not inclusive, historically, and we have to think about how, what are they doing now to be inclusive of, different perspectives and um yeah, because I mean, I think certain, white cube spaces have been exclusive. And it's like, you have to think for yourself, like, do you want to be in that space? Like, yeah, I don't,
No,
yeah, that's a
that's
certain
a
question.
great point. Sometimes you have to ask like, okay, but do I want to work with this? Do I want to be associated with a space like this? And as you said, you have to have morals. But also the other thing is, how are they going to, because also there's a lot of spaces that will also inadvertently try to censor your work. Because censorship has
Hmm.
become a huge issue, especially in the US, especially from my own work with museums and galleries. I'm seeing that a lot. So how do we counter that in a positive way and actually just create spaces for ourselves, um, where our work and our sort of yeah, voice can really be heard. Um, but yeah, thanks for making that point. I think that's like um a good thing to think about, especially when exercising like one's agency for sure. Like you can't just sort of pander to these spaces that might not actually have your best interest. So yeah, thank
Yeah.
you for that.
Yeah, yeah, you make a point. Like sometimes you just have to make your own spaces. You can't just wait. Sometimes you don't have like wait for a gallery to show your work. Sometimes you could literally just rent out your own space, show your own work, frame it how you want to frame it. You have all the agency. You're in control of everything. Sometimes when you're included in a certain space, they want to control the way that, your work is framed, whether that be with words or, if you're in a group show, forcing it into a certain theme that you might not, align with or, um, yeah, I mean, sometimes these institutions will have your work and then they'll try to censor some of it, but you have to learn when to pull out of it, when to say no. I want it to be framed this way. You have to, have a hard back. You got to learn when to say no. I don't want to do this. This is how I want this work to be perceived, you know. Um, but yeah, in terms of the slide, yeah, I don't know if you guys kept no, I had the presentation, so you guys didn't keep talking about the other questions. But yeah, I think I left it off here, the target audience, who the work is for, if it's for a specific audience. I think, I thought a lot about, audience, like, and sometimes your work isn't for everyone to experience, Is it, you know, you have to think about, is this appropriate for children to see, for example, or, you know, you have to put yourselves in the positions of different people and ask yourself, is this work for you to understand? I don't think all works are for everyone to understand. Sometimes it's a case where it's like, if you know, you know. If you know, you understand, And then the last question, are you using the camera as a mirror or as a weapon? Um, you know, Sometimes you pick up a camera and your insecurities will shine through them, or, the things that you're angry about, or the things that you're thinking about, and just as you can do that, the camera can be used as a weapon as well. One thing I, think about is lighting, and the way you can use lighting as a way to depict someone as good or evil. There's such thing as good lighting and evil lighting, and you have to ask yourself like who you're okay with photographing, and how you portray them. Sometimes you'll be asked to photograph a very evil person, and then you ask yourself, oh, should I do this? And then you don't want to do it in a way that usually do things, because then you make them out to look like a great human being. I think there's also different, lighting techniques you can use to depict people, a certain way. And in that way, a camera can be used as a weapon as well. But, that depends on how, you view the person that you're photographing, and what you want to say about them, because, you have a lot of power in your hands. As image makers, we have so much power, and we have to realize the weight that we hold in terms of that. Let's see. Okay, and then here I want to kind of briefly talk about, the dangers of the aesthetic of, just creating a pretty picture. I think as photographers, especially, the ones working in our own communities, we have to ask ourselves, who is this image for, and who benefits from how it looks? And does the aesthetic serve the story, or does it obscure it? I feel like we get so caught up into, when we're editing a picture, making it look aesthetically a certain way. And in doing so, we might obscure certain parts of, the truth. Or, I think we have to really think about, what story is it that you want to tell? What emotion do you want to evoke? And how is your editing and, the way you style, the way you frame, crop, edit, colorize a photo, how does it, serve the story in a way, rather than making it flat, in terms of like depth. Um, yeah. I think that it can become dangerous when you focus so much on aesthetics that the story kind of becomes blurred within the process. Yeah, photography has a long history of framing violence or poverty or cultural difference in ways that are, visually seductive and emotionally distant. Yeah. And then I'm going to shift gears here and talking about my personal influences and inspiration when it comes to image making. And the things that, inspire me right now are, literally just people and my friends and family, and the elders and the lives that they've lived. I find a lot of I love conversating with people and finding out, their stories and the lives that they've lived. And, that those sort of things happen organically. And I think we have to, I think we should listen more than we shoot, because listening, sometimes the story happens just by listening to other people and listening, about their experiences. And sometimes we just have to put the camera down and just listen, even though we might miss a moment, or, something that we might want to capture in the moment that they're speaking about it. I think it's important to listen, because sometimes when we have our cameras in our faces, it can become very voyeuristic. I like to use images as a way to resist, our colonial past, our colonial presence. And I kind of, sometimes I'm just like, I find myself, like full of anger, and sometimes I just want to fight. And I will do that by making an image in which I feel like I'm fighting with it, like fighting in terms of like creating counter narratives. Yeah. And then some writers and thinkers that, I'm currently, you know, inspired by and reading, Christina Sharp, Frantz Fanon, Diane Brand, Toni Morrison, Octavia Butler, Zora Neale Hurston, and Gloria Garcia Peña. Those are some of the people that, are influencing my work right now. And then here I'm just going to talk briefly about visibility and how to get your work out there, because I don't believe in gatekeeping. But first things first, social media. I think we should not underestimate the powers of social media. It's very powerful. And as much as I want to disappear at times, I find that sharing period on social media, it's a way to like make your work visible. It's a way to circulate your work. A lot of people who work, a lot of editors, a lot of producers, a lot of people, work in museums, they are on social media as well. That's how they find a lot of people. I will ask people, oh, how did you find my work? How did you discover me? Like, how did you find out about social media? Instagram is a really big tool on visibility, and you can find a lot of, editors through there. And then second, send that cold email. Don't be afraid to send that email. 9 times out of 10, an editor's email, you can find them online. And if you can't find them in all the research that you do, there's likely someone that has worked with them who you can reach out to, who could, hand you their email. But, I say email once or twice a year per editor. I say that because, a lot of people, they get so many emails a day, a month, and they get annoyed with it. And sometimes they don't want to go through the trouble of looking through emails, especially long emails. So I say when you email an editor, keep it short and sweet and very blunt to the point. Say what you want and what you want from them. And don't beat around the bush, because they don't like that in my conversations with, people in that industry. And then third of all, create different bodies of work. I think it's good to be consistent. I think, editors often look for people who are consistent in their ideas and their execution and their delivery. I think it's good to create different bodies of work, series of work that reflect that. I think it's important to have a website in which you organize it in a way that people could see it as in they're going through a gallery. Okay. Next. Okay, so these are just some of the ways that I've kind of used images as resistance. Here this is a photograph of my grandmother here in Dominican Republic. And I had printed this image on wood, and I'm thinking about material as well, and our connections with these materials. I've been printing on, alternative surfaces like this. This is on birch wood. And then I had cut a mirror piece in the middle, so that I'm tying into conversations of, the gaze and who's looking at who. And, this is a photograph of the piece itself. So you could see yourself reflected in the shattered mirror piece in the center. But to keep it short, this image is, it's about resistance itself. It's about, woman-led resistances in the past, things that have been erased historically. A lot of documents leave out a lot of the contributions women have made in revolutions, in rebellions that have happened historically. And, the little ones that have created bigger changes, like, the ways that women have used plants and herbs to, resist colonial narratives and yeah, I can say a lot about this work. I'm just gonna keep going. And then the gaze as resistance, the way, the people look back towards the camera. Like I said, I think it's important, when if they're not specifically looking at the camera, when they are looking at it, I, have the conversation of, there are going to be people looking back at this image, how do you want to look back at them? What do you want to say with that? So here I'm looking at the gaze as resistance, and here the frame as resistance, the way you crop within an image, and the kind of message you want to relate to it. This was a much wider image, but I had cropped, because I feel like I wanted to center this man. This was taken during Carnival, and as we know, Carnival itself is a way we have resisted, and we use, Carnival across lands, in the Caribbean, and the diaspora, it's the one day that, enslaved people were allowed outside to celebrate their culture, and we've also used that in a way to mock our oppressors as well. And there's certain costumes that, reverse this power structure. So yeah, that is the end of my presentation.
Thank you so, so much for that, Ashley. That was so beautiful and captivating. And thank you as well for showing us examples of your work. Um, Ashley's work is very visible online, which is great. And one thing I noticed before I open up the floor, is that there's a distinct section on your website for commercial work or select clients rather, and then your personal work. And what I really saw to be so effective or successful was that there's a distinct style in both of the work, stylistically or maybe aesthetically. I don't know what the right word is to use, but there's obviously that's the biggest sort of balance that every artist has to play is between commercial work and personal work. How do you make time for both? Um, for most people, especially in my experience, personal work is not the one that's necessarily very financially viable. The commercial work, obviously, is the stuff that perhaps supports the personal. But I wanted to sort of get an understanding of how you, balance both in order to grow your CV, which is so incredibly strong. Was that a sensibility you had to really learn early in your career? Yeah, could you share a little bit more? Because I think a lot of people here want to get their artwork out there, but one of the challenges is how do you support that without sacrificing your morals in commercial work. So yeah, I really loved what I saw, but I know the behind the scenes of like what balances might have to take place. And I wanted to ask if you could share a little bit about that.
Yes. Okay. So that's something I really struggled with, that balance between commercial and personal. This year I was just done with commercial because it can be a little bit, you can feel a little burnout from that. But when I was doing commercial work, I was in school as well. So I was getting my bachelor's at NYU while also working, while also trying to do personal work. And I felt like it was so hard to carve out time for my personal work because I was in school and because I was also doing jobs at the same time. But I had to realize that every time you pick up the camera, you're always coming with a sort of, you know, mindset, a sort of, things that you're thinking through, themes and ideas, and
Mm.
and when you get approached with assignments, you have to think about, okay, what if this is something I would have never, like, what if this is no money involved? This is something I
Mhm.
want to do for myself. How would I approach, the scenario? How do I feel like I'm still taking basically I approach my commercial work as if I am doing my own personal work. You know,
Okay.
I keep in mind, what the client wants in mind, but also, clients will come to you because of your personal work, because of how that looks like. They want to maintain that sort of similarity. They don't want, I feel like when it is just very distinctly different, I mean, I think that's just harder for people to determine it's your work. I think if you want people to know it's you, you approach it as if you're doing your own personal work, as if there's no money involved, as if you
Mm-hmm.
created the shoot yourself.
Okay.
And a lot of the time, you come in with your ideas, your mood board, the
Mm-hmm.
way, it's a collaborative process between you, the client, and the person being photographed. It's always some sort of collaboration, but nine
Mm-hmm.
times out of 10, they'll come to you because of how your personal work looks like. Um, and yeah, I think it just comes naturally in that way.
I think that's great. So what I'm hearing is basically you need to make it work for you and make it sort of yeah, make sense for your portfolio. Because I think what I'm saying is that it's a very strong portfolio, but when you have like a range of clients, like how best you make it look succinct. And what I really loved about what you said is that it's true, editors and curators um look for consistency in bodies of work, or even just if you have a body of work. Because I think one of the things that I see is that photographers are working and making beautiful work, at least in the Zambian context, but there isn't like a succinct body of work. Even if it's a work in progress, I need to sort of at least be able to see that, okay, there's something you're wanting to say here. And, but that allows for, because some people are asking about like how do I get gallery representation? How do I get approached or position myself best to show in spaces? And I think having a consistent voice and yeah, evidence to show that this I've been talking about this and this has been my point of interest. Just because of time, I think I'm going to ask people to put in questions and maybe we can address them because I want to give space to our many attendants to ask you questions as well. For example, Carlos has asked here, were there any times throughout your art journey that you hesitated to show your work? And if so, how did you get over that obstacle?
Yeah, I feel like I'm going through that right now. But I think that just comes with feeling that the work is not ready to be shown. And I feel like to get over that, how do I get over that? Um, I feel like you have to throw yourself out there sometimes, even when you feel like, I mean, you know yourself when the work is ready. Um, but sometimes making it tangible is a little bit tricky because of lack of money or and sometimes it's just funds, like getting the funds to make the work tangible because you can create something, anything online digitally, but creating the work, like sometimes I have like insane ideas and I'm just like, oh, that's gonna take $1,000 to make.
Yeah.
But I feel like I will do the most that I can digitally so that when I do make the work tangible, um, it comes out in a way that I feel satisfied with. I don't know if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
I think one thing that I always think about when I feel hesitant about putting work out there is like, okay, where is this hesitation coming from? As you said, it could be funds, it could be just lack of sort of belief that it's good enough, which is not a very productive thought to have. But it can be very damaging. But I think one thing that I really think about is like, let your decisions reflect your hopes, not your fears. So I think like even if the work, yes, might need some funds, but it doesn't cost any money to, for example, just put it on your social media. But I think first identify where that hesitation is coming from. Is it because you haven't yet really conceptualized it properly and it's like an unbaked cake, then maybe sit on it. Maybe you need a few more shoots around it. But if it's coming out of a fear of perception or a fear of whether it's good enough or not, I think, as you said, you have to put your work out there and let your decisions reflect your hopes, not your fears. Um, and Brandon has asked, how are you enjoying the process of printing images with different materials? Also a question I had for you. Just looking at the first couple of works on your on your personal artwork page, and they look amazing, which they do.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you. And how am I enjoying the process of printing on different materials? I mean, I'm just thinking about the history of materials itself. Sometimes I think printing on paper is boring. Sometimes I want to print on, I'm thinking about printing on wood and metals and thinking outside of the frame. When I think about photography and traditional photography, I always think, oh, it's an image and a standard frame. But right now I'm kind of thinking, how can I make kind of like photographic sculptures in a way that is not
Mhm.
really, that becomes kind of 3D. And I'm kind of having
Yeah.
fun with it, like the experimenting with it, because I feel like it aids to whatever story you're telling it. It like expands it in a way. It becomes more contextual.
I love that because I think I feel the same way when I see like photographs in frames all the time. Depending on the body of work, I'm with it. But lately I've become very interested in like photographs as references for other art forms. So like printmaking, Vibrate is doing cyanotypes, which is like I wish I could be in Ghana right now to attend. So yeah, looking at how the photograph is a reference point and actually a starting point for other kind of mediums of work. Because yeah, I do think that we're living in a time where you can really sort of transform an image into a different thing. And one of the things I've worked on is like laser cutting like a posterized image from my archive, which I redesigned on a book cover and then brought it back into a analog way of printmaking and pressing that onto like paper. So I really love those the sort of ways in which like analog and digital can sort of work with one another. Which brings me to my next question about film, because I think I mean you shoot digital from my understanding as well as you said you mentioned about point and shoot and film, and I think everyone here who knows Vibrate and is here through Vibrate or as photographers might agree or should agree that film is not dead. At least not in my opinion. So, but what do we say to the naysayers, right? Like for you, like of course spaces like Vibrate have um been birthed, and I know like David has been talking about this for years. In Lusaka, we're working on something, and there's this sort of like insurgence of like our generation, so to speak, who's taken an interest in this medium, which is so beautiful, so slow, also very expensive. So how best do you feel that we sustain this? Like what do we do in our um yeah, I know, I mean the answer might be obvious, like just shoot film, but like what would you say, like what would you suggest for us to continue on this campaign as artists? Yeah.
I think exactly what you said, the slowness of it, the aspect of waiting, I right here, I've been here since December, and I've been shooting both digital and film. And here there are no film labs. There's nowhere I can develop. Would have to go back to the US to develop all of these works. And I've really been thinking about film itself um, and it's it's something I can't just like stop. I've produced some very beautiful images with the digital camera that I have, but I realized that, the film camera that I do have, allows me to be in certain spaces where I can't bring my digital camera because of the small aspects of it, but
Mhm.
also just the act of taking rolls of films and you can't look back at it at the moment. So, and you have to like wait for time to pass in order to look back and see the image. And so I can't see these images until months later. And I had the chance of going back to um New York to develop some film. And I feel like because you haven't seen the photos for so long, you create sort of I feel like it's like a different experience when when the images do reveal themselves. And I feel like new ideas come to light within that. And, you know, even just new things that I feel like just with time, you get new ideas and themes, and then sometimes they flat out show themselves when you
Mm-hmm.
when you see the photos
Yeah.
after developing them.
So Carlos actually mentioned that there's a film lab in DR, so it's on the chat. He's shared a
Probably in the capital. I'm in the mountains.
Oh, I see.
I'm
Okay,
in
yeah.
I'm in the Silao area. I'm like, I have to take 3 hour drive to go
Develop the film.
there. And
That's a labor of love. That's a
I'm
labor of
like,
love.
I know of one in the capital, but
Yeah,
I
it's
never
in
go
Santo
there.
Domingo. Yeah.
I never go there. I'm on the other
So
side of the island.
yeah,
But thank
that's the challenge in Lusaka too. I'm like traveling with film, and the other thing about taking film on the plane is that like something about it going through the scans just
you.
messes it up. And I'm like, oh God. So yeah, I get it. It's a challenge, but we continue. We continue. There's a question from Yao who's asking about how to curb, I think maybe the word is edit, or like how to curb his photographs because he tends to show a lot. What would we advise? Um, I think there's a question about how best to, I suppose, I don't know, Yao, maybe you can clarify. Like, is it a question about how best you want to position your work or create a portfolio that's succinct? Um, because yeah, while less is more, I think showing enough strong bodies of work is also important. So that's one question. And then there's one question from Chamwaza who's asking, what was it like finally putting yourself in a position of choosing your path and taking your photography more seriously? Was that always the case for you from the time you started university or from the time you started shooting?
Yeah, okay. So to answer y'all's question first, um, in terms of how to, I feel like, edit down, what I mean by that is I feel like photographers a lot of the time they'll do a shoot, right? And it's the same subject, the same location, and it
Mm,
has a lot of the same qualities. And I think people need to learn how to choose one out of the whole bunch, because I feel like when you choose multiple, it oversaturates what you're showing. And I find personally when I choose one out of the bunch, sometimes there's 3 pictures that I feel like are so strong, but I have to think about you have to sit with the work. I think it's important to sit with the work. And when you do sit with it, after time, you will look back at it and be like, oh no, that's the one gem. That's what I call it, gems of a photo shoot. You have to pick the gems
mhm.
and just learn how to filter it. And then the whole body of work will be strong, I feel like, because when you're very specific about a photograph, you're going to analyze every aspect of it. But when you choose 3 that are kind of similar, I feel like it taints it a little bit,
Yeah.
the story that
Yeah.
you're telling. Unless they're very, very different, in terms of, frame, the visual aspects of it. But sometimes I see people have trouble editing down bodies of work that are very similar to each other. I think we need to learn how to be distinctive, and
Yeah.
even
I
if we're
think
saying the same story, how to be distinctive within that.
I think we just need to learn how to kill our darlings. This is what I would say. You have to kill your darlings, and doesn't mean it doesn't exist forever. I think it still remains on your hard drive, and it can be adapted and reiterated for a different project elsewhere. But I think the problem that you probably have, which I can understand, is like attachment to the work you've made, and not including it in the public sphere feels like a betrayal of your work, but actually you need to sort of be cruel to be kind in editing. And again, think of it the way you would edit a story or writing a film. It's the same thing. You need to keep what's going to communicate your message most strong. And the stronger your message and concept, the easier the editorial process is, at least in my experience. But yeah, kill your darlings. But yeah, maybe we take Chama's question, and maybe David and Vibert can let us know how much time we have left, because we can chat for longer. I'm here, but I'm sure everyone has things to do as well. But so Chama's question was about like putting yourself out there and positioning your path and taking photography more seriously. Um,
Oh, yes. I feel like because of what I was taught in college, I was taught how to critically think about images. I feel like the program that I went to didn't put too much emphasis on technical skills, or anything of that sort. I feel like the majority of what we did was how to analyze an image, how to critique an image, how to go about an image in a way that you are true to yourself, you are true to your community, you are true to what you are depicting in front of you, and how to be critical about, these things. And I feel like going into college, I was serious about, photography. I mean, the program I was taking is photography and imaging. But in terms of critically thinking about, every aspect of photo, I think it truly set in stone for me, maybe freshman year of college. So when was that? 5 years ago? Yeah. So that was me personally. Oh, I feel so
um,
bad. All the questions weren't answered, but my DM is always open if you want to ask more questions. I'm not a gatekeeper. I will always respond if you have a
um,
question.
so many great questions here, actually. I wanted to sort of maybe talk about there's a few questions here that kind of address the same thing. Um, in relation to sorry, I'm just catching up on all the messages. One second. Um, so yeah, getting through periods of creative blocks. But also I think a lot of people are interested as well in what ways your own identity as somebody from the DR has defined your work, and has photography deepened your sense of self-exploration in relationship to the community, um, and how photography can be used to explore different sides of ourselves. Oriomi also mentioned something about wanting to make a project about a notoriously exploited social group that they're also part of. And they're a bit nervous about this. So, yeah, all of these questions are sort of dealing with self-exploration, but also photographing our own communities. How do we navigate this? Yeah, maybe you could share a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think photography itself is lightness and darkness. It's lightness and shadow. It reveals parts of yourself, that you want to be seen, but also parts that you kind of keep hidden away. And I feel like, I mean, you mentioned the self-portrait, Sally. Thank you. Yeah, that I have always struggled with self-portraits, but I think one day I was positioning myself as the subject, and I, I set my camera up, and sometimes you just have to put yourself out there, no matter how scary it is. It's very scary. But it, I did that because I was going through, a dark period in my life, and I felt like I was going through a sort of transition. And the way I felt in my body, was, I feel like sort of shifting. And the camera can be such a like a vulnerable experience. And then visualizing yourself in that medium can be very powerful. And I kind of just use that way, like that. I use the camera in a way to sort of empower myself, but also put myself in a vulnerable position in that way. So it can be scary, but also liberating. Yes. Let me see, because I forget the questions. I have to look back.
I know that was like a one, I was like combining the questions of the same nature in one. And then somebody else has asked about your use of religion in your work as a motif. I mean, is that something that's intentional? Because they're saying here, a cross can be found in your frames, and they wonder where that place comes from.
Yeah, so I'm constantly thinking about religion. I think about the violences that have come with religion, the ways we have adapted to certain religions. Um, I mean, I work with different religions, I feel like, especially being here in Dominican Republic and having syncretic religions here. But in terms of what you're speaking of in an American context, I've been thinking about how, religion has been used to, justify very terrible things. And the way it has, been a part of a lot of, Afro-diasporic people's lives and the way that it has affected, populations and the way that we, live and express ourselves, in a religious aspect. But I feel like it all intersects. There's a lot of intersectionality happening, and I'm still, working through that, but there's a lot of motifs when it comes to my work in terms of religion, because I feel like that is one of the aspects, like it affects, whether you're a very religious person or not. I think, my family and, the people that I'm working with, um, it's affected them in some sort of way. So
Okay.
I,
Mm,
I like reality.
yeah. Just as a last sort of closing question in relation to creative blocks, and any books, articles, or films that have helped you to get to this current space when thinking about your approach. Um, yeah, how have you gotten through creative blocks? And somebody else is asking about recommendations of books. The reason why I put these questions together is because sometimes I feel that like moving outside of my practice and like the thing I'm doing all the time and actually just reading and going to a new space completely does help me unblock this space. But again, going back to the psychoanalysis of it all, like why are you feeling the creative block? Like maybe you're just doing too much. Maybe you actually just need to chill and do something else, you know? But yeah, for you, how have you gotten through creative blocks? And do you have any recommendations of books, articles, or films that have helped you to get to where you are in your practice, when thinking about your approach?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to look at, you know, artist talks in general. I like to do a lot of reading. I think I get a lot of my ideas from reading. Um, because when you read, there's a lot of intersectionality happening in there, what connects to what. And, it's important to think about what you're curious about, what you care about, what you love, what you hate, and then find books that, align with what you're thinking about. I mean, right now, I feel like, I'm reading a lot about mobility and, Caribbean mobility, and I'm thinking a lot about water power, aerial power. I'm thinking about, the ways in which, certain people are able to move, um, and who is in control of movement. Um, I think about colonization and in relation to migration and, how that all intersects with each other. And, I tend to look for books that speak about those things. And then, my work kind of comes from my
Yeah.
readings. And then after you read, I think it's important to write too. A lot of ideas come from writing. You have to write even when you don't feel like it. I think it's important to write every day, like journaling, you know. You don't have to talk about photography all the time. You talk about what you care about, what you love about, and then photo will come out of it.
Right. I agree. I think also like just going to if there's places around you that have like shows or like exhibitions that are accessible, I think for me, like I like going to those places alone by myself and just being there for like a very long time and actually reading and understanding what other people are also doing. And then also just one last thing, because we do have to close now. I wanted to ask you, Ashley, if you've come across the work of Saidiya Hartman by any chance, because I was thinking about what you were talking about, like truth, and what happens when, what I think Saidiya Hartman does, for those who may not know, she came up with this methodology of working with archives. It's a literary sort of form of working where it's called critical fabulation, where she looks at the sort of ways in which people have been written about, specifically like African American women from the enslaved history context, and thinking about how we don't sort of worry too much about the untruths and the fiction of the archive by trying to make it truth, but instead filling up these gaps with fabulations and thoughts and imaginations of different endings and different stories that might create a better way of remembering people that existed who were written in a very violent way in the archive. So for me, I think that's also an interesting thing to think about in photography, because I don't really believe that photographs can ever be fully truthful. Um, and so Saidiya Hartman, also to answer the question, somebody was asking about references and recommendations. So Vic Moy, I would recommend Venus in Two Acts by Saidiya Hartman, and also Beautiful Lives, Wayward Experiments, because it really shows how that's a really wonderful like way to resist and counter the fact or the fiction of the archive by actually making it more fictional with stories that we want to hear instead, and taking claim again of these stories in a manner that dignifies the people that we're reading about. Because her records and her references on archives are like police records, very like obscure archives about women in the 1910s in the US. And so, yeah, there's something very harrowing about reading these stories, but also something very like um, powerful in her approach of not wanting to make everything factual, but actually fictionalizing in a way to sort of heal as well. But yeah, I wanted to sort of obviously you've heard of Saidiya Hartman, but yeah, I just thought that would be a good recommendation to share. I don't know. Yeah.
Amazing. So on that note, thank you both so much. We've enjoyed listening so much, which is why we should have intervened sooner when the overran, but we were just enjoying it. Yeah, I think we all feel pretty inspired and like we've learned a lot from this conversation. And just a couple last things before we go. We just wanted to see if we could take a group photo with everyone who's comfortable turning their camera sorry, for the final bit of this, just to, yeah, again, capture our first masterclass session with Ashley and Sana. Yep, everyone keep sharing any events or Instagrams. We want everyone to connect and stay in touch. But yeah, let me just see if we can get everyone set up for this photo. Thank you for turning them on. Everyone looks amazing. Let's just see who's ready to do it. Okay. Wow, it's like pages of your. This is exciting. Okay. Okay, so if everyone's ready to take a picture, I'm just gonna quickly screenshot it now. 3, 2, 1, smile.